Imagine you're standing in a forest 10 million years ago. There's no language yet, no words, no stories, no jokes, just breath, movement, and eye contact. And then, somewhere in the trees, a sound rises up that isn't a scream, isn't the warning call, isn't anything your ancient ancestors needed for survival in the way food or fire was needed. It's a rhythmic, breathy, almost hiccuping burst of air. Huh, huh, huh. It spreads from one creature to another like a wildfire jumping treetops, and here's the unsettling part. Scientists still cannot fully explain why that sound exists at all. Because laughter shouldn't make sense. From a purely survival standpoint, it's almost embarrassing. It doesn't help you outrun a predator. It doesn't help you find food. In fact, in the wrong moment, laughing could get you killed, drawing the attention of something with teeth. And yet, this strange, involuntary explosion of sound has survived for millions of years, embedded so deeply into who we are that babies do it before they can even talk, and people in comas have been recorded doing it in their sleep. So here's the mystery we're chasing today. Why did ancient humans laugh? Not why do jokes make us laugh, because that's actually the wrong question, and you're about to find out why. The real question is much stranger, much older, and much more unsettling. What was laughter for before we even had the words to explain what was funny? Let's rewind the clock, not just thousands of years, millions. Somewhere between 10 and 16 million years ago, before Homo sapiens, before Neanderthals, before anything we'd recognize as human, there was a common ancestor we shared with chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, and bonobos. And that creature, whatever it looked like, already had something resembling laughter. Not laughter at jokes, laughter during rough and tumble play. Chimpanzees, when tickled or wrestling with each other, produce a breathy panting sound, almost like someone fogging up a mirror in rhythmic bursts. Researchers who've studied it side by side with human laughter found the acoustic patterns are eerily similar. Same rhythm, same breathiness, same context. Play, safety, physical closeness. But here's where things get strange. This isn't just an ape thing. In the early 2000s, neuroscientist Jack Panksepp did something that sounds like the setup to a joke itself. He tickled rats, using ultrasonic recording equipment that could pick up frequencies far beyond human hearing. He discovered that young rats, when tickled on their bellies, emitted rapid chirping sounds, chirps that only happened during play, chirps that stopped when the rats were stressed or in unfamiliar territory. Chirps that some scientists describe cautiously as something close to rat laughter. Let that sink in for a second. If rats laugh, even in some primitive echo of the word, then laughter isn't something that started with humans being clever. It's something ancient, something wired into the nervous systems of mammals long before any of us had a single word to say. So the first big twist in this story is this. Laughter came before language, not by a little, by millions of years. Language in modern form is maybe 50,000 to 100,000 years old. Some researchers push it further back, but even generous estimates don't come close to touching the age of laughter, which means our ancient ancestors were laughing long before they could tell each other why they were laughing. Try to imagine that. A world where you could laugh, but you couldn't ask, what's so funny? A world where the sound existed before the meaning did. So if it wasn't about jokes, what was it about? And this is where things shift from biology into something closer to psychology, and honestly into something a little uncomfortable. Because the leading theory isn't that laughter was born from humor, it's that laughter was born from vulnerability. Think about tickling. It's one of the oldest and most universal triggers of laughter across cultures and even across species. But here's the strange detail almost nobody thinks about. You cannot tickle yourself. Try it right now. It doesn't work the same way. Your brain, specifically a region called the cerebellum, predicts your own movements and cancels out the sensation before it can surprise you. Tickling only works when the touch is unexpected and comes from someone else, which means laughter in its earliest form required another creature. It was never a solo act. And where on the body are we most ticklish? The neck, the ribs, the belly, the underarms. In other words, the exact places where a predator would go for the kill, the exact places we instinctively protect in a fight. So picture this. Two ancient primates rough and tumble playing. One playfully grabs at the other's vulnerable ribs, not to kill, but in play. In that split second, the body has to make an incredibly fast decision. Is this danger or is this safe? And laughter, some researchers believe, was the signal that answered that question. It was the body's way of saying out loud to everyone nearby, this is not a real attack. We are safe. Keep playing. That's the twist that changes everything. Laughter might not have started as an expression of joy at all. It might have started as a biological alarm system for safety, a sound built specifically to diffuse tension between two bodies locked in something that looked like a fight but wasn't one. And once you see it that way, laughter stops looking cute and starts looking almost tactical. Here's where the story gets even weirder, because this pattern doesn't stay confined to individual play fighting. It scales up, way up. In 1962, in a village near Lake Victoria in what is now Tanzania, something happened that sounds fictional but is very well documented. It started in a boarding school for girls. 3 students began laughing, not giggling politely, uncontrollable, exhausting, hours-long laughter that spread to classmates. Within days, the school had to shut down. But the laughter didn't stop there. It spread to nearby villages. Entire communities were reportedly overtaken by fits of laughter, lasting anywhere from a few minutes to, in extreme cases, weeks. Schools closed. The outbreak lasted for months and affected an estimated 1,000 people. Now, here's the part that should make your skin crawl a little. Researchers who investigated afterward didn't find a virus. They didn't find contaminated food or water. What they found was stress, mass psychological stress tied to major social upheaval happening in the region at the time, converted into an epidemic of contagious laughter that physically incapacitated people. If laughter was purely about humor, this makes no sense. Nobody was telling jokes, nobody found anything funny. But if laughter is actually an ancient nervous system response to overwhelming tension, a kind of pressure release valve built into our biology long before we were even human, then suddenly the Tanganyika laughter epidemic isn't so bizarre. It's actually a terrifying demonstration of exactly how deep this reflex runs. And this brings us to one of the strangest discoveries in the entire field. Most laughter has nothing to do with jokes at all. In the 1990s, a psychologist named Robert Provine did something almost nobody had thought to do before. Instead of studying laughter in a lab with staged jokes, he sent researchers out into malls, streets, and college campuses to secretly record thousands of natural conversations and catalog every single laugh. The goal was simple: figure out what people were actually laughing at in real time. The results stunned even him. Only about 10 to 20% of laughter followed anything that could be classified as a joke or funny statement. The overwhelming majority of laughter happened after completely mundane sentences. Things like, "I'll see you guys later," or "It was nice meeting you." People weren't laughing at content, they were laughing as punctuation, as social glue, as a way of saying, "I like you, I'm comfortable with you, we're on the same side." Provine also found something else that connects directly back to our ancient ancestors. Laughter is roughly 30 times more likely to laugh when they're with other people than when they're alone. Not 30% more likely, 30 times. Even watching the exact same comedy alone versus with friends produces wildly different laughter rates, which tells you something profound. Laughter was never really about the joke, it was about the group. So now we have to go back to those ancient primates in the forest, because a new picture is starting to form. Laughter wasn't a byproduct of intelligence or cleverness. It was a bonding mechanism, older than speech, older than fire, older than tools, built to keep social groups cohesive. And in a world where your survival depended entirely on being accepted by your tribe, where isolation from the group often meant death, a reflex that instantly signaled we are safe together would have been one of the most valuable traits evolution could possibly select for. But here's where the mystery deepens again, because laughter isn't just social, it's also, quietly, a biochemical warfare against pain. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar, the same researcher famous for the idea that humans can only maintain meaningful relationships with about 150 people, ran a series of experiments on laughter and pain tolerance. Participants watched either boring content or genuinely funny content, then had their pain threshold tested, usually with something simple like a blood pressure cuff inflated until it hurt, or ice water.
The results were consistent. People who had just laughed, real, full-bodied laughter, not just polite chuckling, could tolerate significantly more pain afterward. The reason traces back to endorphins, the body's natural opioids. But here's the specific detail that makes this so fascinating. It's not the humor itself that triggers the endorphin release. It's the physical act of laughing, the rhythmic contraction of your diaphragm, the forced exhalation, the muscular exertion of a real laugh. That's what triggers the flood of feel-good chemicals. Which means, in a very real sense, laughter is a kind of ancient, built-in painkiller, one that doesn't require plants, medicine, or knowledge, just other people, and a reason to let your guard down. Now stretch that idea across a small group of early humans huddled together after a long, dangerous day. No hospitals, no medicine cabinets, just each other. A shared laugh wasn't just pleasant, it may have been medicine, a biochemical reward for staying
Close to your group, for maintaining the bonds that kept everyone alive through winters, through predators, through the raw brutality of prehistoric life. But if laughter is this ancient survival tool, this deeply wired social glue, why does it sometimes feel like a weapon instead? This is where we have to talk about the darker side of laughter. Because ancient humans didn't just laugh with each other, they almost certainly laughed at each other too. There's a psychological condition called gelatophobia, the fear of being laughed at. It sounds oddly specific, almost invented, but researchers have found it in cultures across the globe, and some believe its roots trace back to something ancient and structural in how laughter functions in social hierarchies. Studies on laughter in social groups, including observations in primate communities, show that laughter doesn't just bond equals, it also flows along power lines. Subordinate individuals tend to laugh more in the presence of dominant individuals, almost like a social lubricant that smooths over the tension of unequal status. Laughing along, even nervously, even when nothing is genuinely funny, can function as a kind of submission signal, a way of saying, "I'm not a threat to you." Which means laughter has always carried two completely opposite functions stitched into the same reflex. On one hand, it was a genuine, warm bonding force, the sound of shared safety. On the other hand, it could be used, consciously or not, to enforce hierarchy, to mock, to exclude. Ever notice how being laughed at by a group feels like one of the most painful social experiences a person can have, even worse sometimes than being yelled at? That's not a coincidence. That reaction is ancient. In a species that depended entirely on group acceptance to survive, being laughed at wasn't just embarrassing, it was a signal, deep in the nervous system, that you might be on the outside of the group. And in prehistoric terms, being outside the group could mean death. So here's the uncomfortable truth hiding underneath all this. The same sound that kept our ancestors alive through bonding could also, in the wrong context, become one of the most socially devastating experiences a human being could endure. Laughter has always been a double-edged sword, and it still is today. Think about how differently it feels to laugh with your closest friends versus hearing strangers laugh behind your back. Same sound, completely different emotional universe. Now let's push the timeline forward, because there's another twist waiting, and it has to do with how laughter might have actually helped build language itself. Here's a detail most people never think about. Laughing and speaking use almost the same physical machinery. Controlled breathing, precise timing of exhalation, coordination between your diaphragm, throat, and vocal cords. Some researchers argue that the repeated rhythmic practice of laughter, something our ancestors were doing millions of years before speech existed, may have helped shape and refine the exact neural and muscular control systems that speech would later depend on. In other words, laughter might not just be older than language, it might have been part of the biological scaffolding language was eventually built on top of. Think about how strange that is. The sound so many of us dismiss as silly, as trivial, as the opposite of serious communication, may have quietly been rehearsing the muscles and brain circuits that would one day let us write poetry, tell stories, and ask questions like the one we're asking right now. And there's one more layer to this, something almost poetic if you sit with it long enough. Laughter is one of the only human behaviors that is almost impossible to fake convincingly. Go ahead, try faking a laugh right now. A real one, not a polite ha-ha, but an explosive, uncontrollable one.
It's incredibly hard to pull off, and most people can tell the difference immediately, sometimes without even consciously knowing how they know. That's because genuine laughter triggers involuntary muscle movements around the eyes and diaphragm that are extremely difficult to consciously replicate. Which means laughter, in a strange way, has always functioned as a kind of honesty signal, a proof of authentic emotional state that couldn't easily be forged in ancient times. In a world without written contracts, without recorded promises, without any way to verify someone's true intentions, a reflex that reliably revealed genuine comfort, genuine safety, genuine bonding, without the possibility of easy deception, would have been an extraordinarily valuable social tool. You couldn't lie your way into someone's trust with a fake laugh nearly as easily as you could with fake words. So, by now, the picture forming is almost the opposite of what most people assume when they hear the question, why did ancient humans laugh? We tend to imagine some caveman version of a stand-up comedy show, early humans sitting around the fire cracking jokes about mammoths. But the real answer is far stranger and far more primal. Laughter wasn't born from cleverness. It was born from bodies, from play fighting that needed a signal to say, this is safe, from the sheer biological necessity of bonding tightly enough with the group that survival became possible. From an involuntary reflex so deeply wired that it appears in rats, in chimpanzees, in infants who can't yet understand a single word, in coma patients, in entire villages swept into mass psychological events. It existed before we had stories to explain it, before we had the words funny, joke, or humor even existed in any language. Millions of years of laughing came before a single generation of humans could explain, even to themselves, exactly why they were doing it. And maybe that's the real answer hiding underneath all this. Laughter was never really about content. It was about connection. The joke, the punchline, the wit, all of that came later, layered on top of something far older and far more essential. Underneath every laugh you've ever shared with a friend, every uncontrollable fit of giggles with someone you love, every nervous chuckle in an awkward silence, there's a signal running all the way back through millions of years of evolution, through ancient primates wrestling in forests, through the first humans huddled together in the dark, saying without any words at all, I am safe with you. You are safe with me. We belong to each other. Which brings us to something worth sitting with. In a world now saturated with laughter tracks, staged comedy, algorithm-driven humor content, and forced smiles for cameras, it's easy to think of laughter as entertainment, as a product, as something manufactured for consumption. But strip all of that away, go back far enough, and you find something almost sacred underneath it. A sound that predates our ability to lie, predates our ability to explain ourselves, predates even our ability to speak. A sound our ancestors used long before the first joke was ever spoken, simply to say to each other across the darkness of an unforgiving world, we are still here, and we are still together. So the next time you find yourself laughing, really laughing at something so small you can't even explain why it was funny, remember what you're actually doing. You're not just reacting to a joke, you're performing one of the oldest rituals in the history of our species. You're doing something creatures were doing millions of years before the first word was ever spoken, a sound so essential to survival that evolution refused to let it go, generation after generation, species after species, all the way down to you, right now, in this exact moment. Maybe that's the real reason laughter still feels so good, so uncontrollable, so impossible to fake. It's not just a reaction, it's a message from the deepest part of our biology. One word repeated for millions of years in a language older than language itself. Together, together, together.